No. The longest winning streak of an MMA fighter who's fought in the UFC is not owned by Khabib Nurmagomedov, who retired at 29-0. The honor belongs to Renan Barao, who piled up 32 straight wins by the time he was 27, and at the height of his career was the UFC bantamweight champion and considered by many to be one of, if not the best, pound-for-pound fighters. So how come he is all but forgotten and not in any conversation alongside the other greats of his era? Was he really this good? He was, until 2 fights against Dillashaw reduced the pound-for-pound champion to a pile of rubble from which he could not rebuild. Here is the story of the rise and fall of Renan Barao. Similarly to many other great Brazilian fighters of his generation, Renan Barao was born into a poor family. His father was an accomplished boxer, but an early divorce meant that Renan was raised mostly by the female line of his family. Barao is actually Renan's nickname, given to him by his grandmother based on a soap opera character, and translates as Baron. Renan found martial arts at age 14 and started training at the Kimura Nova Unia gym. Initially, he was just into jiu-jitsu and started to compete, but the boxing experience with his father led him to MMA. Barao debuted on the professional circuit in 2005 in a less than desirable way, losing a decision to João Paulo Rodrigues in his hometown of Natal. But this loss was not predictive of the next chapter of his career. His well-rounded skill set, combining elite grappling and explosive striking, made him unbeatable on the regional circuit. Barao conquered Brazil with 23 straight wins in 5 years and caught the eye of the big leagues, which for his weight at that time was the WEC. As his career progressed, Barao moved to Rio to train at the main Nova Unia gym under Andre Pederneiras, and alongside other high-level killers like Jose Aldo and Eduardo Dantas. The WEC debut went just as smoothly as his previous matches. Consecutive submission victories over Anthony Leon and Chris Carriasso showed Barao he belonged on the big stage. In 2010, the WEC was absorbed by the UFC, and the lighter weight classes finally reached the big stage.
Now, as the UFC continues to grow globally and we're doing more and more fights, now it makes sense to bring in those lighter weight classes. You know, once they come into the UFC, they're just going to be part of the whole machine. The way that we promote fights and do it now, they're just part of the whole deal.
Any idea when we will start to see 135 and 145 pound bouts in the UFC?
Immediately. I mean, these guys are going to roll right into the UFC now, starting in January.
A win against Cole Escovedo launched Barao's UFC journey, but his stock really jumped up with his next battle against Brad Pickett at UFC 138. After 4 minutes of brawling, it was the Englishman who fell to the canvas, and Barao finished the job with a submission, earning a Fight of the Night bonus and the eyes of many fans. After making a splash against Pickett, the Baron needed another solid victory to come into the title picture, and veteran Scott Jorgensen provided the perfect opponent. Barao showcased his entire arsenal over 3 rounds, including rock-solid takedown defense and dynamic striking. Fate played her part, and the bantamweight champion Dominic Cruz was injured, leaving the spot opposite contender Uriah Faber free. So the UFC did what they love to do and set up an interim title bout. Unfortunately for Barao, the whole UFC 149 was a flop, and the 25-minute dominant but uninspiring performance did little to please the fans. But nevertheless, Barao was now the UFC interim bantamweight champion. Cruz's infamous string of terrible injuries created a precedent. Instead of fighting for the undisputed belt, Barao had to defend his interim strap not once, but twice, still remaining the only fighter to have done so. First on the list was Michael McDonald. Barao showed patience in his approach until he opened up more in the 3rd and 4th. And after a nifty transition in the 4th, the Brazilian locked in an inescapable arm triangle. After the grappling masterclass, the unprecedented second interim title defense ended with a highlight for the striking aficionados over Eddie Wineland. Barao finally had a date to fight Dominic Cruz for the title unification, but unfortunately, Cruz was yet again sidelined and finally stripped of his title. Renan was promoted to undisputed status, which was an easy decision given his position and record. By that time, Barao was widely considered to be among the best pound-for-pound fighters, a statement generously shared by Dana White and Joe Rogan in promo pieces and press conferences.
See that stare down? How he steps. I bet you guys didn't know this, but I really like Renan Barao. I like that kid.
Still, he had to fight someone at UFC 169, and Uriah Faber stepped up to take the spot on short notice. No judges were needed this time, and no boos from the crowd were heard as Barao knocked Faber out in the first round. Barao was 27, entering his physical prime with a wealth of experience on a 32-fight win streak and a truly well-rounded skill set. He was on his way to defend his belt multiple times to cement himself as the bantamweight GOAT. But that's not what happened. Barao was scheduled to defend his title against Rafael Assunção, but the Brazilian was injured and replaced by TJ Dillashaw, which would become the turning point of Barao's career. Few gave Dillashaw a chance. He was coming off a single win and a loss to Assunção prior to that. But with the odds of 7-1 against him, TJ produced one of the biggest upsets in history at UFC 173. Dillashaw perplexed the champion with his footwork and unorthodox angle changes. A vicious overhand sent Barao to the canvas in the first and demonstrated that Dillashaw hadn't read the script in which he was supposed to lose. Over the course of the fight, Dillashaw dished out an unfathomable amount of punishment and finally finished the job in the fifth. After this fight, Barao was never quite the same. While the story of the aging great is sadly all too common in MMA, we have to watch our favorite fighters go out on their shields and sully the records later in their careers. The case with Barao was different. He was not aging. In fact, he was just entering his prime age. The rematch was scheduled to happen 4 months later, but Barao passed out the day before the weigh-in when attempting to cut the last precious pounds of water from his body, and the fight was scrapped.
I'm here with Renan Barao. Let's just start this off. For folks who don't know, Renan Barao failed to make weight. He had a medical issue, was removed from the fight last minute. Renan, what went wrong yesterday?
I was dehydrating in the bathtub. I fainted. I hit my head. I was taken to the hospital. I don't remember anything that happened before or after. I just remember being waken up in the hospital already. I've had 35 fights cutting weight this method. It's always been fine for me. I think the whole problem is I got up too fast and I blacked out and fell, so that was the whole issue. I'm very sad to not be fighting here tonight. This is something I do. It's a dream come true every time I go in here and fight. I'm very disappointed not to be fighting. I want to come back and I want to face TJ. He's been saying a lot of things and I want to come in here and tear his head off.
He still managed to return with an entertaining win against Mitch Gagnon. The cloak of invincibility was gone. Gagnon more than held his own before getting submitted. The rematch with Dillashaw was finally set a year after their first meeting, and fans were hoping the unstoppable version of Barao was back, but they would be sorely disappointed. Dillashaw was even more confident than their first fight and fought like a true champion. This time, the onslaught ended in the fourth. Barao has always been known as a big weight cutter, and with so much damage taken over 30 pro fights, it became clear a step up to featherweight was inevitable. The UFC chose Jeremy Stephens to welcome him into the new division, and the result was pleasing for the fans, but not for the former bantamweight king. Renan's speed and agility allowed him to win the opening round, but Stephens' size and power came into play, and he rocked Barao with several big punches. After 3 rounds of fisticuffs, Stephens was declared the winner, and it looked like Barao wouldn't have an easy time in his new weight class. In September 2016, Barao earned his last victory to date over the unimpressive Felipe Nover. Renan decided to come back to 135 against Sterling, but given his past weight-cutting history, the California State Athletic Commission refused to sanction him, and the bout was fought at a 140 pounds catch weight.
140 for the former bantamweight champion!
Sterling won the bout in dominant fashion. Adamant that he belonged at bantamweight, Barao made weight in Florida, but again lost the fight, this time against Brian Kelleher. The tragic and rapid downfall would continue. Not only was the recent undefeated for 9 years champion set to fight a UFC debutant, but he lost to him via a split decision. To add insult to injury, Barao failed to weigh in miserably by nearly 7 pounds and had to forfeit 30% of his purse. Renan kept his place in the UFC, but was buried in the early prelims for his next fight against Luke Sanders. But even this level proved too much for the former bantamweight kingpin, and he was knocked out in the second round after yet another botched weigh-in. Determined to return to glory, Barao once again went to featherweight in 2019, but the much stronger Douglas Silva de Andrade had his way, and the fifth straight loss became the last nail in the coffin. Renan Barao tried to resume his career in other promotions on at least 4 occasions, but either he or his opponents had to pull out, or the whole event had to be canceled. Still, Barao successfully returned to his roots and won a gold medal at a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament in 2023. It looks like he's going to continue grappling and fighting in bare-knuckle boxing, so we'll still be able to watch him compete even if it's not at the highest level. Barao's rapid downfall is an important reminder of the realities of MMA and how unforgiving it is. A single loss can completely destroy the confidence of a fighter and turn his career around. While the reality is likely more complicated, and the years of weight cutting and accumulated damage surely played a big role in his decline, the fact is that Barao went from a pound-for-pound great to a chewed-up early prelim fighter in a short 5 years during his physical prime. Nevertheless, Renan Barao's accomplishments cannot be denied, and his run of 32 consecutive wins remains unbeaten in modern MMA and serves as a glorious high goal for newer generations of fighters to strive for.